Good evening, everybody. Welcome into the Nittany Lion Sports Report weekly here on BLS with Bob Long and Tyler Gehlhaus alongside. And, well, a bit of a somber day for Penn State football fans, Tyler, as it seemed like everything was kind of falling into the breadbasket that Sunday with losses by Washington that was happening concurrently with Penn State. For a while, it looked like Notre Dame was going to go down to the University of Pittsburgh. And, of course, there were several other key matchups that went what could be a fringe playoff team's way like Penn State, a loss by Georgia to LSU, certainly at the top of that list. And all of a sudden, things were looking really good on a Saturday afternoon for Penn State until they weren't. Until Felton Davis caught a last-second touchdown pass to take down the Penn State Nittany Lions, 21-17, in what seemed like a total replay of 2017 the game against the Spartans on the road, and certainly a total replay of the two-game set. Ohio State, a crushing loss, and then Michigan State, in many ways, a letdown at exactly the wrong time. We're going to talk with Brian Tripp from BTN and Go PSU Sports about that in just a few minutes, but Tyler, first to you. Truly a tremendous turn of events in a negative way for the Nittany Lions in the last 3 weekends.
Yeah, and as you said, Bob, as the whiteboard says, deja vu. Literally felt like the same thing that happened last year in that 2-week span in Columbus and then in East Lansing for those two games. And it feels like to me that both games were, against both Ohio State and Michigan State, were eerily similar for the most part. And blown leads in the fourth quarter. Couldn't get first downs when it mattered, couldn't run out the clock, and couldn't get that defensive stop. And Penn State is right back where they were last year, and not really in a good spot at all. Pretty much, in my opinion, eliminated from college football playoff as well as the Big Ten. They would just need way too much to go their way. And like you said, it's a shame because we're looking at the scores of those other games, and everything's going their way. And not to mention, Iowa State beats West Virginia that night. Penn State would have had an opportunity to jump up to number 6 at least, maybe even number 5. But they're 18 right now, so that's the reality of the situation.
Yeah, and you talk about the way the game went, and you said not getting a defensive stop. There's a lot of ways you can talk about not getting a defensive stop. That includes not stopping Michigan State on their final drive, of course. But it also includes not being ready on a fake punt. That means really not being ready on a fake field goal that probably should have been completed and should have ended up in a score for the Spartans. 4 fumbles where Michigan State put the ball on the ground, and Penn State did not get one of them. Unable to win the
one
turnover.
On the goal line, too.
C.J. Thorpe, bad penalty.
Yeah, penalties and some questionable, but if you have a game come down to, the officials, then you don't deserve the win anyway. I mean, you can't have the game come down to that. And like you said, they had so many opportunities, and it's frustrating to me. Like the special teams play has been very disappointing this year. I'd say the one bright spot is probably Hamler returning, and also Rafael Cheka kicking off. I think has done a great job.
Sure.
I don't
Blake
think
Gillikin.
I don't think he's played as well as he could though. And Pinniger, a freshman kicker, not easy, but a little disappointed with some of the misses he's had. But all told, I mean, Franklin was prepared. They said all week that they had some of their best practices ever, as long as he's been at Penn State. They also practiced for these fake punts and kicks that Michigan State is notorious for running, and the punt was wide open. And you're right, they pretty much should have had that fake kick towards the end of the game, and that would have been a touchdown.
Listen, we're not in the locker room here, but when I hear Trace McSorley say this is the best week of practice we've had, and then James Franklin says something to the extent of, I don't know if he got that from me, but I said the same thing. I suppose there's 2 ways to think about that, but perhaps the cynic in me thinks, what are you talking about? If you had beaten Ohio State 2 weeks ago, would that statement had come up?
Probably not.
Or is that something to do with an insecurity or a rah-rah or something in the middle there?
Probably because it doesn't
make any sense to me.
Because if that's how they play after their best practice of the year, I hope they don't practice well.
Well, that's
from here on out.
I mean, it just doesn't feel like a topic of conversation. It feels like something to fill the media's bucket.
Sure.
So that they have things to talk about and instill some confidence in the fans and maybe in some ways instill some confidence in the players. Certainly, that's a little bit of a stretch and not something that I know about. However, just take a step back. Sounds great. Penn State had a great practice, best they've had in James Franklin's 4 years of coaching. Why? I have problems with that. I don't understand how that comes up or why, if there's not something a little bit deeper, and we saw them really struggle. I don't know if there's a coincidence. That's probably not worth even bringing up.
Right.
But just hearing that even midweek struck me in a certain way.
I kind of agree with you. Looking at it now, I mean, in the time, I'm like, oh, that's good. But then and then you think about it, it's like, well, the amount of practices that these guys have over their careers,
and they singularly,
and you remember, like, what was so great about that one practice that no other practice could match. You know what I mean? So
it really is
interesting.
It's really, really interesting. But right now, we are going to bring on Brian Tripp of the Big Ten Network and Go PSU Sports on to talk about what was a very disappointing weekend for the Penn State Nittany Lions, and we'll welcome him on now. Brian, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing well, Bob. Thanks for having me on, as always.
It's a pleasure to have you on. It's a great night to have you on. Not that it's a great occasion necessarily for Penn State fans, but a great time to bring you on and have a little bit of a discussion of what's happened and what went wrong over the last, let's call it 6, maybe even 5 quarters of football that has really changed the Penn State football season.
Yeah, isn't it crazy if you look back over the last, let's call it 67, 68 minutes of football, it's gone from Penn State being the toast of the country, playing in front of one of the greatest crowds and atmospheres I think I've ever been a part of at Penn State. And now all of a sudden a team that's reeling, having lost back-to-back games, albeit by a total of 5 points, but you have this stretch of close losses against Ohio State and Michigan State and the Rose Bowl game against USC, and people are scratching their heads, why can't they close these games out? So I think it's disappointing. I think it's frustrating because of how close they are, particularly this year. I don't think there was any question that Penn State outplayed Ohio State. They missed opportunities. Penn State had numerous opportunities to close that game out and win. And same thing against Michigan State. I thought Penn State was the better team. They put up 200-plus yards on the ground against a great run defense. The defense, back-to-back games, has really emerged. I thought the defense played well against Ohio State and was equally up to the task against Michigan State, and they just couldn't get that 1 or 2 plays they needed at the end to finish. You can certainly look at the fourth quarter, and every decision and every play is going to be magnified there down the stretch. But to me, it doesn't come down to the fourth quarter. It comes down to Penn State missing opportunities throughout the entire course of both games. Right now, there's kind of a turning point. They're at a fork in the road. Where do they go from here? There's a long season to play out. Certainly still could win 10-plus games this year, including the bowl game. Haven't done that in 3 straight seasons since the early 80s. They've done a lot of really good things, but now where do they kind of go from here? So there's certainly a lot we can get to.
Brian, Tyler Gehlhaus here. Any idea on the team morale right now after 2 devastating home losses? Obviously, they haven't lost a home game in a couple of years. Back-to-back losses again to Ohio State, Michigan State, by a total of 5 points. Just wondering, any idea on the team morale? How do you get how James Franklin and his staff is going to get the guys up for the rest of the games? Because there are some big games left on the schedule and still meaningful football.
Yeah, and I think that includes this week at Indiana. It's not going to be an easy test. I think they're disappointed. I think they're frustrated. And I'm not sure if that Ohio State game carried over into Michigan State. From my perspective, it seemed like it sure did. They didn't seem like the same team. I felt like that was a game they just had to find a way to survive. And what makes it more frustrating is with everything happening across the country, they probably would have been 5th or 6th in the polls this week and right on their way to the college football playoff, and they can get on track offensively and defensively and play it out. So I think they're probably frustrated and disappointed at this point. But knowing James Franklin and knowing the leadership that Trace McSorley brings, I think there's still something to prove. I don't see them. I don't see the last 2 games kind of tail spinning here and forcing this team into a spot where they haven't been, and that's a 3-game losing streak. I think they still want to prove something. There's a lot at stake this season. So I think now it's all right, time to turn the page. If the last 2 losses are disappointing and frustrating, now it's time to people are kind of out on them right now, right? They're down to 18 in the poll. Fans are, oh my God, what's going on? The world's ending. So I think this is the kind of time where a guy like Trace McSorley rallies the troops and things turn around for him.
And I think, Brian, that it's certainly an opportunity and a good time for the team to take that step back and realize that they have half the football season left. But if I may ask one more question about this past week before we get to that, and I talked about it right before you came on, I was mystified by the conversation that both Trace McSorley and James Franklin had with the media in the middle of the week. And this was before the game. It was after our show, so we didn't get to comment on it. But when James Franklin and Trace McSorley say that this is the best week of practice that the program has had since either of them came on campus, I don't know that I've ever heard, I guess, a comment like that from anybody at any program. And so I wonder, where did that come from? Was that something that was maybe trying to hide a little bit of insecurity on the player side, or are we now looking into that a little bit too much after the fact?
Well, Bob, if that is true, I think that's what's most disconcerting to me about what happened on Saturday. They're coming off a bye week. They are saying all the right things, that they're prepared and ready to go. And James Franklin even said post-game Saturday, hey, they didn't do anything we didn't expect. It's what we worked on didn't translate over into the game. So where is the missing? For what reason did what they worked on all week, their preparation, preparing for Michigan State's trick plays, why did that not translate over into the football game? Why during the game were they lining up wrong? Why on defense were they missing assignments? Why were they taking penalties that were mental penalties, that were penalties that were unforced penalties? What happened that didn't translate from the week of practice, the 2 weeks of practice, and into the game? That's what's most disconcerting to me about the past week against Michigan State. Against Michigan State, I thought the defense played really well. I thought the offense certainly did not have its best game, but they ran the ball against a team that hasn't allowed teams to run the ball against them all season, and they were unable to finish. But to me, the most disconcerting thing is what you talked about. Great week of practice. James Franklin saying afterwards, we did all the right things, and then all of a sudden, why did that not translate onto the football field on Saturday?
Yeah, Brian, I also had a difficult time with some of the play calling in that game by Ricky Ronnie, especially because Michigan State does have such a good run defense. I think they were number one in the country, and Miles Sanders broke off a couple long runs. Also, they have one of the worst passing defenses in the country, and it didn't really seem like Penn State was either able to or really did take shots downfield. And I just think that there were some questionable calls, specifically on a 3rd and goal from the 2, and they throw a fade to Juwan Johnson, and it wasn't anywhere close. And they really haven't gone to that play this year. And then they had to settle for the field goal by Pinniger, which put them up 17-14. I mean, I just was wondering your thoughts on really the offensive play calling, because I think the defense has kind of outperformed the last 2 weeks and have really put them in prime position to win those games. And I just don't think the offense has been able to capitalize.
Yeah, I agree. I think if you told me they'd hold Ohio State to under 30, they had an opportunity to win that. And then against Michigan State, tell me you're going to hold them to 21. You really expect the offense to win that game. Completely agree with you there. And even if the offense doesn't produce any more points, here's an offense that in the fourth quarter of the last 2 games hasn't been able to get a key first down just to extend a drive and finish. Everyone talks about, well, the defense has let up points at the end of the game to finish. Well, to me, it's more of the offense is supposed to be the strength of the team. Why can't they get 1 or 2 key first downs, hold on to the ball, go into the victory formation, and finish a game? As far as play calling, I think you're looking at a guy, Ricky Ronnie. This is still his first go-around as an offensive coordinator and as a play caller. I think Ricky's done a lot of really good things for Penn State this year. I really liked his scheme and his play calling in the Pitt game. I thought they called a pretty good game against Ohio State. But when it comes down to winning Big Ten games against Ohio State, Michigan State, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Iowa, it's going to come down to, can you get a push up front and can you run the football? Penn State's been really good between the 20s, but for whatever reason, when they've gotten inside the 20-yard line, they have not been able to establish, and I guess you could say 30-yard line against Ohio State. I think that's why they threw some of those Stevens plays in there. They haven't been able to establish what they want or an identity. And I think at this point, it's Ricky just trying to come up with something and dial something up that's going to work. So I think you're seeing him as a first-time play caller, is still trying to get comfortable, and an offense right now that has not had success the last 2 weeks of getting the ball into the end zone. So I think those are the 2 things. Trace has not. I agree with you. I don't think he has developed that chemistry. We were all expecting the receiver position to be a real strength for Penn State this year, and for whatever reason, and maybe Josh Gaddis going to Alabama for $500,000 to be their co-offensive coordinator. Look, that says a lot about the kind of coach that Josh Gaddis is. Maybe that's a bigger loss than we imagine. Maybe having the continuity of Saquon, Gesicki, and Hamilton in the passing game is a significant loss for Penn State, and more so than we imagined. But for whatever reason, it seems like with the exception of KJ Hamler, that passing game has not taken off, even with a better offensive line, with McSorley's ability to extend plays. Freiermuth and Hamler have been the top two targets. Jawan Johnson, DeAndre Tompkins, Brandon Polk. It just hasn't materialized this year, and I think they're starting to grasp for some things. I'd like to see personally Hamler get more touches in a variety of roles in that offense.
Ever since the Rose Bowl close loss to USC, Penn State's had obviously those other very close one-possession losses to Ohio State, Michigan State, back-to-back years. This seems to be a growing concern for Penn State fans, these close games, leads in the fourth quarter with the ball with like under 4 minutes. I saw a crazy stat, something like that. Moving forward, is this something that you see as a continued concern for Penn State and the fan base, or is this something that hopefully Franklin and the staff wake up to and we can put to rest either the rest of this year or even going into next year?
I think they're always evaluating, and I think there's no question they have to be able to finish games. And to me, as I said before, I think it comes down to more the offense, which is a strength of this team, finding a way, whether it's being more physical and just being able to perform and execute and get one or two first downs. But my counter to that, and I think they would argue too, is look, yeah, sure, they have leads in those games and need to hold on, but they did put together a last minute. There's this notion out there that James Franklin and his staff are clueless in the fourth quarter of big games. Well, they put together that last minute drive against Iowa to win a game last year. They probably didn't belong winning. They put together that drive to go to OT against App State this year and win that game. A game that you would argue at the end they probably didn't belong to win that game. The Irv Charles game against Minnesota that put them on the track to the Big Ten title a couple of years ago. They needed a drive to set up a field goal to force overtime and win that game against Minnesota. UCF, the first game for James Franklin. It's not like they haven't done it in the fourth quarter when they needed to. So I think there's kind of this notion that they're clueless and they don't know what they're doing in the fourth quarter. I think that's wrong. But I do think that anytime you have a lead, especially at home against a team like Ohio State or Michigan State, you have to find a way to win those games. You have to find a way to win those games. So that's why it's frustrating. And this year particularly, look, I thought last year Ohio State played a whale of a game against Penn State. Mm-hmm. I thought this year Penn State was the better team, especially at Beaver Stadium. I thought last year Michigan State, Lewerke made some big plays in that game. I thought Penn State had numerous opportunities to beat Michigan State this year. I think it's disappointing and frustrating. That's why people are upset. But I don't think it's time to panic. I know people are kind of up in arms. What's the staff doing? But I think what they've proven, if they win 10 games this year with the benefit of the bowl game, and maybe they win it without the benefit of a bowl game, again, they have not won 10 or more games in 3 straight years since the early 1980s. So I think people need to step back. Maybe winning the Big Ten 2 years ago accelerated the path to where they are. I think they're still in a really good spot, and the staff is really good. It's a young staff still, some guys doing things for the first time. Sure, you got to hold on to games where you're leading with 5 minutes left. Yeah, no question about it.
That's exactly
no panic.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to ask you was about the expectations. Obviously, 2016 was they kind of caught lightning in a bottle there and ran the Big Ten table after the Michigan game and obviously won the Big Ten. Ever since then, it seems like expectations have been higher really than ever, at least in about a decade at Penn State. And it accelerated the expectations of fans. And I think that's a lot of the reason why it's tough for them to swallow the fans. Mm-hmm. Do you believe, though, that the expectations, at least at the preseason for Penn State this year, were reasonable expectations to, fight for a college football playoff spot? And at the same time, is it surprising that they are out of that equation already?
Yeah, I'm surprised they're out of the equation in mid-October. I thought that stretch of games against Iowa, Michigan, and Wisconsin might be the stretch that knocks them out of the conversation, especially what's happened over the last 5 quarters. No, I think the expectations were reasonable. I mean, those are the internal expectations. You have one of the best players in college football at quarterback. You have a very deep and skilled team, relatively young on defense, but I think they've started to answer some of the question marks they've had with that unit, an improved offensive line. I mean, they're probably, 2 plays, right? 2 plays total away from being the number 2 team in the country right now. So I don't think those expectations are totally unreasonable. They've had the lead in the 4th quarter with a couple minutes left in both games they lost. And if they hold on to those games, they're 2nd in the country or 3rd in the country. And Penn State's one of the top teams in the entire nation with a chance to favorite easily out of the Big Ten to go to the playoff. And they probably actually have some margin for error to play with based on what's happened. So, no, I think it was reasonable expectation. And I think that's what makes it more frustrating for fans.
Brian Tripp on with us here on the Nittany Lion Sports Report with Bob Long and Tyler Gehlhaus. Brian, I appreciate your perspective on the question that Tyler asked 2 questions ago, and it's kind of going to be my theme for the evening, and that's that, yeah, they had trouble closing this one out, but that generally speaking, they're putting themselves in some tremendous opportunities to win games against, let's not forget, 2 outstanding programs on a year-to-year basis, and some of those late game opportunities that they were able to convert upon in games that, well, at that time, maybe the concern was maybe the 3rd quarter instead of the 4th quarter. So maybe it's a question of completeness rather than it is pure end of game. And it's that can put a program like this over the top. Maybe not evaluating the last 5 minutes of a given game, but how many at-bats you give yourself. And can you play complete 60 minutes of football?
Yeah, I think it's consistency, basically, and it's eliminating mistakes from the first. The Ohio State game could have been 20, 24-0 at halftime and over. I mean,
very true.
It very easily could have been over. If Penn State goes down and scores after Garrett Taylor's interception, who I think has been great and a great surprise for Penn State against Michigan State, they go up 21-7, that game's probably over. So, sure, we're magnifying and people are blowing out of proportion what the coaching staff is doing at the end of these games in the 4th quarter. But the last 2 games, it's been missed opportunities way before the last 3-4 minutes that I think have cost Penn State the game, as opposed to the last missed opportunity, and that is getting a first down against Ohio State or Michigan State so they don't get the ball back and score. That, to me, and I agree with you, Bob, is more of the issue with this team. It's a team that's missed opportunities. It's missed opportunities over the last 2 games to score points, put teams away. They're settling for too many field goals. They obviously have a situation at kicker right now where they don't have a consistent kicker. They have a freshman in there. You can't miss opportunities, and that's what's killing them. It really is. Yep. And I agree with you too that Georgia just got rolled by LSU. I'd much rather be in Penn State's spot where they had a chance to win against Michigan State and Ohio State. Sure, maybe it's not as frustrating for fans. You can just say, chalk it up to a bad day. Georgia got beat. Let's move on. James Franklin's teams have never not been prepared to play and never not been in a game until you have to look all the way back to 3 years ago in that game against Michigan.
Yep.
That's the last time. And I think that speaks volumes about this team, the staff, that even when they don't have their best game, they have a chance to win the game. I think that speaks volumes about them.
Brian Tripp on with us here, and you see his picture that was just on the screen. He's
oh, don't scare people.
Well, you got a big trophy in your hand, so I'm impressed by your strength there, lifting up a Big Ten hockey championship rinkside. So for those of you that don't know, but I think everybody does at this point, you are the exemplary voice of the Penn State hockey program, and wanted to get an update on how things are going. And I also got through Ben Jones's book, Hockey Valley, and I saw that you, my friend, got yourself your very own chapter in there. So tell us about what that was like, for one. And I guess that was 2 off seasons ago now, going through the process of being interviewed by an author and what would end up being a book about Penn State hockey. And how did the first couple weekends go?
Yeah, let's start with Ben's book. I thought Ben did an awesome job for someone who doesn't have a journalism degree. He's like a poli-sci guy who, in the Sandusky scandal, started tweeting and all of a sudden became a great writer and a really good friend, and someone who I think has some of the best coverage of Penn State sports. He's honest. He doesn't only take the macro or the micro perspective. He kind of takes the macro perspective sometimes. He sees the whole picture, develops really good connections with his sources. And I thought Ben did a great job on that book. It's an easy read, but I think it's an informative read. So it was really cool that Ben decided to capture, I think, with myself and Rodney Martin, who does the PA, some of the other people who are involved with the program, the ancillary people that kind of help make, I would argue, I don't know that I'm that big of a part of it, but help make Hockey Valley what it is. It's kind of cool that Ben decided to include me and some of those other folks in the book. And it was fun to read that. I thought Ben did a great job, and it's just been a tremendous honor to be a part of such a program and work with Coach Gehlhaus and his staff. I've been lucky at Penn State to work with, whether it's Coach Cooper with baseball and Coquise Washington, Pat Chambers, and of course Russ Rose, James Franklin. But let me tell you, they're all great coaches, and I think Guy Godowski's right at the top of that list with what he's been able to do at Penn State and just the type of person and the culture that he's developed with his program. And then your second question about the team, to start 2-0 and beat a ranked Clarkson team that had 20 or more wins in 2 of the last 3 years, was in the NCAA tournament last year. And that was a great start. Penn State coming into the year had, I guess, concerns or questions, especially externally, and I'm sure some internally. How do you replace the program's all-time leading goal scorer, Andrew Sturtz? And how do you replace 2 excellent defensemen with Trevor Hamilton, Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year last year, all-world block leader, and Eric Audio? Well, Penn State got 9 goals against a team that allowed less than 2 goals per game last year, 8 different goal scorers. Brandon Byro, Liam Folks, Nate Soucis, a new guy, graduate transfer Ludwig Larson, all look poised for big years. I don't think scoring will be a problem, and they did that without Dennis Smirnoff. And then how do you replace those defensive guys? Well, to make matters worse, Kevin Kerr, who's a superb player, one of the top 5 players on the team, I think, and Evan Bell is not eligible to the second semester because of transfer rules. You're pretty shorthanded defensively. You got a freshman, Paul DeNaples, steps up, plays really well. Alex Stevens, James Gobetz, Darian Hamilton, and then carrying the load is 2 guys who logged a lot of ice time in the past. Cole Holtz, I thought was great, and then Chris Mallory blocked 13 shots. The team blocked 54 shots. So I guess they have that identity and mentality. They're going to block shots even without Trevor Hamilton. So I think you got a lot of good answers. Got good goaltending from both Chris Funke and Peyton Jones. And a team that started slow last year starts much quicker this year. And it gets off to a better start. Now it's maintaining that and growing and building on that foundation. But I think it's a really good start for them. I think they're excited. I think they know they have a chance to do something special.
Straight from the source, the voice of the Penn State Nittany Lions hockey program, Brian Tripp, on with us here on the Nittany Lion Sports Report. We certainly appreciate the time. Wish you the best of luck the rest of the way with the hockey season, and certainly good luck the rest of the way covering Penn State football as well. We appreciate you being a part of our show.
Guys, always appreciate the time. Thanks so much for having me on, and I'll be on BTN pregame and postgame for Iowa in a couple of weeks. Hoping it's warm down there on the sideline because it was rather chilly for Michigan State. I don't know that anyone was really ready for it.
Oh man, well we will hope that you keep warm, and we'll keep all our eyes on BTN, and we can't wait to see you up there.
All right, thanks guys. Have a good one. Always enjoy it.
All right, take care, Brian. There you have it. That's Brian Tripp coming on. Really, really good to hear from him. Appreciate him coming on, and he always brings some great perspective, and he's got a damn good hockey voice too, and he does a great job broadcasting that team.
Yeah, he's very impressive. I mean, he knows his stuff from sport to sport. Definitely impressive. And he's got me ready for college hockey now too. And yeah, I can tell you what, I'm not sure if you've ever, I think you've been to a game at Pagula before.
Oh, absolutely.
For our listeners out there, if you're into hockey, just a little bit, I highly recommend going to a college game at Pagula Arena at Penn State. One of the best atmospheres you'll ever come across for college hockey. And for really, frankly, a lot of college sports, to be honest with you, because of how close you are to the action and how loud it gets. Student section is right behind the net, and they truly are building an incredible team because they came from a club level not many years ago, and now they're tops in the country, top 20 in the country. So, like he said, credit to Guy Godowski up there, and sky's the limit for that program.
There's no doubt about it. And the other thing is that, back to what he was saying during the interview, I thought he made a good point. It was going to be a portion of my message over the second half of the show, and that is that I really do think it's about getting at bats, and they're getting more at bats right now under Franklin than they did under O'Brien, and we understand why. There were scholarship issues there. They had just come off what was, obviously a horrible thing for many reasons not associated with football. And that handicapped the football program as well during O'Brien's time. However, they're getting much more at-bats than in the later stages of Joe Paterno's tenure. And frankly, they're more consistent in this short period of time than at many periods, any periods truly, during Joe Paterno's tenure, year to year to year. They haven't experienced the very same high in the form of a national championship yet,
right.
But they are consistent in a college football atmosphere where it's a lot more difficult to be successful. And that's not taking a thing away from the old coaching staffs here at Penn State or anywhere else. But the days of Tom Osborne bringing on 110 players at Nebraska so that a half-decent player doesn't go to Iowa State and Iowa State can't beat a pretty good Colorado team in the Big 12 or a Texas team. I mean, those days are over. High school football is deeper. Scholarship limits are less at the college football level, and the talent is more widespread, and yet you have a Penn State team for 3 years with a relatively new and young coaching staff giving themselves an opportunity to win every single game that they play. Now, this is not a rah-rah moment. They should have won that game against Michigan State and should have won that game against Ohio State. But I do think it's important to remember that those kids on the other side are also very, very talented. In Ohio State's case, probably more talented. And they're giving everything they got to try to come back and win that football game, just like Penn State was trying to win it. And you know what? Sometimes things happen, and those things happened.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you bring up all valid points right there, great points. It's when expectations, Penn State fans really aren't used to these high of expectations.
It's true.
Since probably the mid-2000s, from, really the Darryl Clark era, the 2 years that was. Because then after that, of course, they had a couple mediocre years, and I always say mediocre. I say 8-4, 9-3, but that was like pretty typical at the time for a Joe Paterno team. And then obviously the scandal rocked the world up there and really everywhere. So and even then they survived and went above 500 all those years. Credit to Bill O'Brien and obviously the players that hung around, gave it their all. But the problem is now, not the problem, but the issue that is there is that ever since they won that Big Ten championship in 2016, the expectations went from here to here very quickly.
For sure.
For everybody, for fans, for everybody, for college football. And then when you don't live up, and then every time you lose a game now, it hurts a lot more because you know really how close you are, and every game's always meaningful. But when you're in the playoff race, you know you can't afford it. So it hurts so much more when you lose, especially when the games could have been won.
And that's exactly right. They could have and should have been won. So I'm talking holistically when I talk about keeping everything in perspective. C.J. Thorpe getting just an absolutely mindless personal foul penalty.
I didn't even see it, though. Like the replay, they didn't really show it.
It wasn't that much, and it was only one replay that I saw as well.
I mean,
but
obviously
just
dumb.
But stop. I mean,
I know. I mean, they would have had him stop. So and again,
then it's decision time. And did they kick a field goal? But instead, first and goal, of course, with that new life, they walk it in there, and it's 7-7. So there's one, and that also came on the same drive as the fake punt that they were not ready for, no matter what the coaching staff may say. They were not ready for that particular wrinkle, and it ended up resulting. 2 big Penn State mistakes resulted in one of the 3 touchdowns that Michigan State scored all day long. We can talk about Amani Oruwariye dropping that interception on the final drive for Michigan State. He's had tremendous success. Drops happen. It's just the amount of little things like that over the course of the game. 4 fumbles by Michigan State. They didn't come up with any of them.
It should never come down to that. Same as everyone wants to make a big deal about the 4th and 5 run play against Ohio State. Well, like Brian Tripp said, and we discussed as well, it could have been 21-24-0 at the half.
Right.
So it should never have come down to that. Of course, that's what everyone's going to remember, but both these games losses should not have come down to
Sure.
what they did. And really, you're rolling the dice, and you have a 50-50 chance when you put yourself in that position.
Yeah, you could list off a lot of
And like
things.
Brian Tripp made a great point, we've had the benefit of the doubt probably more than we really thought. I mean, he's right. The UCF game, going back to Franklin's first ever game, and obviously the most recent was the Iowa, but there's been other games in there
Yep.
too where the things have gone our way.
Well, even in this game, I mean, Miles Sanders fumbled that football in the second half.
Yep.
He absolutely fumbled that football
We
when
got-
he was
yeah.
kind of getting held up there, and it looked like he had injured himself and whatnot, and so that's obviously not what you want to see. But yeah, he dropped that football. It was a legal tackle, even though it was kind of looked like it could have been pretty bad, and that was ruled down on the field. They couldn't go back and review that play, and Penn State got the next snap off quickly, and they were off to the races. So, there are things that have gone Penn State's way as well, and they had the opportunity to use that to their advantage. They had the opportunity to execute better. They had the chance to get a couple first downs and run out the clock, but it didn't happen. Trace McSorley a little bit off. Give Michigan State's defense a little bit of credit for throwing him off for a secondary that really hasn't given anybody any problems all year long. It's a Michigan State team that was up for a big game against Penn State, and a Penn State team that came out a little bit flat and could not put the points on the board early enough to start to run away with it. Michigan State hangs. They hang. That was the point of the broadcast, really, in the third and fourth quarter, is that Mark D'Antonio is saying just hang on, and we think we're going to win a close game in the fourth.
And that's
what happened.
what's so crazy about what you just said is that Michigan State had a fourth down and maybe 5
Sure.
with like a minute 40 left, all 3 timeouts. Instead of going for it, they elected to punt.
Yep.
I mean, they had no respect for Penn State, and it turns out it benefits them because if they do go for it and they don't get it, Penn State, the field position, not to say they would have run out the clock or anything like that because you just never know, especially with Penn State, but he had all the confidence in the world in his defense
Yep.
that they were going to get that stop, and lo and behold, they did.
We are going to talk about that in our episode of the Blitz in the middle of this episode of the Nittany Lion Sports Report here after our next break. And we're going to talk about the different play calls in the last 3 drives of the game, which are all 3 offensive drives in the fourth quarter for Penn State, and how getting the ball with such little time left in really all 3 of those drives, under 5 minutes to go with the second to last drive. And then what ended up being the last drive was 2 plays and they couldn't get it down the field and score a touchdown. But I'm talking about trying to salt away the game up 17-14, those last 2 drives. And we'll talk about those play calls and what went right, what went wrong, why it went wrong, and what's excusable versus what's not. Because I think that's very important. There's a lot of noise out there right now, Tyler, about play calling in general. So we're going to break it down very specifically, those last couple drives, dating all the way back to what you asked Brian Tripp about, which was the lob to Juwan Johnson. So hang with us on that. We'll be back in just a couple minutes to talk about that. But want to wrap up your kind of final thoughts on Saturday in and of itself. If you have anything further.
I mean, it's like I said earlier, I mean, there were a ton of good games on at 3:30, so I was score watching, and I thought it would be a little bit more enjoyable, that I'd be able to kind of sit back, enjoy a nice – I thought Penn State was going to win by 17 points. There were times early in the game after the Miles Sanders long run and that led to the touchdown to KJ Hamler. I'm like, yeah, this should be a nice win.
Yep.
Maybe not a walk in the park, but pretty close. And then they just couldn't, they lack that like killer instinct sometimes. And the more they let Michigan State hang around, I knew it wasn't going to be a good outcome. And it was almost the same thing with Ohio State. Even though Penn State was up 13-7 at the half, they let them hang around, and it didn't feel. They were both eerily similar, and it's just disappointing. But you got to hope eventually they learn from it and get over the hump.
Yeah, I always struggle with that lack of a killer instinct, though. Two things. One, I think they have it, and I think they, in spurts in the past, have certainly put teams away when they've needed to.
Yeah, I mean, they put Ohio State away 2 years ago. They did stop them. So, I mean, I guess maybe they do, but it just
kind Okay.
Yeah,
To-
2016.
Right.
Right. But
But I just feel like that's very similar to Clutch, and I think you know my feelings on Clutch. I don't like the term, the insinuation that it's a large factor in things, and frankly, I struggle with the definition. Anyway, Killer Instinct's the same way. It's like when we can't quite put our finger on things, do we just say, like, kind of like the it factor and the Clutch? And, you know, I just think that sometimes we don't give enough credit to the opponent, and sometimes we say
they're very well coached, Michigan State.
Yeah.
They outcoached Penn State.
They outcoached Penn State.
No question about it.
And it's a good enough team that if Penn State doesn't execute well, I mean, Penn State's not going to beat Michigan State by 40 points, no matter how poorly it seems like they're playing this year. If Penn State plays their best, maybe they beat them by 17 to 20 points. Well, I would argue that Penn State made 17 points worth of mistakes on Saturday. And there you go. I mean, it's as simple as that.
Yep.
And so they're not that much better than the rest of college football to be able to make a bunch of mistakes and win the football game. And that's why there are so many great teams that lose every week.
And that is why Penn State is not elite yet. As James Franklin has said, they are great right now. They're a great program, and they're not elite because of the reasons that you just mentioned.
This is it's 8:41. This is a really Pandora's box question. Who's elite?
Alabama,
Yeah.
Ohio State,
Okay. Yeah.
Clemson.
So why is Clemson elite to you? Because they lose games they shouldn't all the time.
Right, but
In a
they
weak
usually only
conference.
lose one game and they rebound from that one game.
So
that was kind of
Penn State were in the ACC right now. How many games would they lose this year?
I mean,
And last year and the year before.
depending on who they play, I mean, their toughest games would be obviously Clemson. Virginia Tech's not much, I don't think. Miami is Florida State's down
Florida
this year.
State was
NC
good, yeah.
State's pretty good this year, but we'll see really what they're all about. I mean, no, I get it. The ACC
And I have an
compare.
issue with Clemson. That's a personal
But
thing.
I put them up in elite because even James, I feel like, I think it was James Franklin that said this, and I'm sorry if I'm misquoting them, but elite teams, that you can afford to lose that one game, but it's how you respond.
It's true.
And that is why I put Clemson in the elite group, because they've lost those one games that they shouldn't lose, but they tend to respond. And I mean, they've been in the playoffs.
And Penn State's 0-2 doing that. You're
So
right. They are 0-2
They're really the
responding.
only three elite teams. I would have Oklahoma and probably Georgia right on the outside.
Yeah.
And then I think
Georgia newly famous.
And I think Penn State is kind of newly. They're kind of right there with Georgia.
Yeah.
They're
Not
Georgia
as much
might be a little
success.
close, right? But I think Penn State is right there, knocking on the door, and it's going to be the little things that are going to make them elite.
Fun conversation. Really, really good stuff. We'll be back on the other side. Just give us about 2 minutes. We're going to get our whiteboard set up here, and we're going to go through the last 3 offensive drives when Penn State had a chance to salt that game away, and what went wrong, what's excusable, what's inexcusable, and really kind of start to put together the pieces on what happened in that fourth quarter. We'll be right back.
Ford is Mayfair's neighborhood Ford store.
Nobody knows your neighborhood like Dunphy Ford.
Nearly 40 years.
Right here on Frankfurt Avenue.
Generation after generation, our neighbors continue to be our customers. We have access to the cars and trucks you want with financing you need.
Dunphy Ford is Northeast Philly's first choice for America's #1 brand. 7700 Frankfurt Avenue in Mayfair. Online at www.dunphyford.com.
Come experience the Dunphy difference. You'll be glad you did.
What does your character look like? Does it bounce back after each setback? Does it stand out by standing up? Does it make good on good intentions? Character is invisible, until it's not. Only through action will the world know what it's made of, what you're made of. Find out how you can strengthen the character of your community alongside empowered veterans and families of the fallen at travismanion.org.
I would say that LaSalle is dynamic. Prepared. Active. Diverse. Brotherhood. Family.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Nittany Lion Sports Report. Bob Long, Tyler Gehlhaus. It's time for the Blitz here as we take a look at the whiteboard and evaluate one aspect of the Penn State football program or the last game and how that affected what was really, really important in that particular game and how that affected the outcome. Well, tonight I think it's a pretty easy discussion and a pretty easy decision on what to talk about. It's going to be what happened in the fourth quarter, and not just one drive. The last 3 drives of that football game were really concerning for the Nittany Lions. And so let's start with, as Penn State drives down the field with their what ended up being their third to last offensive drive. It's 14 apiece. 14-14, Trace McSorley. And so they run it up the middle to Miles Sanders twice, and he can't quite get to the end zone. So now they're down by the goal line, and Juwan Johnson lines up to the outside, and they run a little fade to Juwan Johnson. I understand that there have been struggles in the past near the goal line for Penn State football, and this goes all the way back to Joe Moorhead. But running a play here to Juwan Johnson, having him go get a football, other than just the pure physical athleticism of Juwan Johnson, at what point has he showed that Mike Gesicki-like ability to just go up and get a football? It's more about the physicality, getting down the field, and being able to go snatch something. But in terms of a pure lob pass, that just hasn't been successful. And down at the goal line, as soon as that ball's thrown, there's no chance. It's not something that they've done very, very often. So I had a really, really big issue with that one. So now it's 17-14 Penn State. And they have the lead, and they stop Michigan State, and they get the ball back. So now, second to last drive, they give the ball to Miles Sanders up the middle. There's under 5 minutes left in the football game. So then they're going to try to go get another first down. So Trace McSorley gets the football. He tries to throw it out wide, incomplete. Throws it over the middle, incomplete. 2 incomplete passes on that particular drive, and they punt the ball right back to Michigan State. Now, as Tyler and I talked about in the last segment, Michigan State had a decision to make as they had the football with under 2 minutes left. And Michigan State has the football, and they got to decide what are they going to do. They trust their defense with 3 timeouts left. They punt the ball back to Penn State. Now Penn State gets the football back, and they need to decide what they want to do. So as the Nittany Lions get the football, it's still 17-14, and they need to decide how we're going to move this football down the field and get 1 first down. So read option with McSorley and Sanders. McSorley gets the snap, a read option for Sanders. McSorley actually keeps this football and goes up the middle. This is a Michigan State team that all day was not letting McSorley be successful after pulling on the read option. And we've seen this in the past because McSorley is a good athlete Not as great an athlete as some of the running backs that are coming out of the backfield, which again is Miles Sanders and Saquon Barkley. So it's not saying a lot, but he doesn't have that top end speed. And one thing that I don't think is talked about enough, he isn't the best decision maker on the pure read option. I think he makes it work enough, but there have been enough bad decisions that he's made over the years that I think it's worth saying that he may not be the world's best decision maker at this point of the read option. So that's the first play that they run. Then McSorley rolls in the pocket, hangs, goes towards the sideline, and then runs out of bounds. I mean, there are a lot of things that I can start to understand. I can understand why on the second to last drive they're trying to pass for a first down because it's not like there's 2 minutes left. It's not like they're trying to burn timeouts. I'm okay with that. And you're playing against a very incompetent passing defense, at least per the rankings. The last drive, I know why you're running the football, but then you're taking maybe an opportunity with McSorley. He gets over to the sideline. Stay in bounds. Stay in bounds and let Michigan State force them to take a timeout at that point. But he runs right out of bounds. Not a very smart play by the senior, and they have to punt the ball back to Michigan State. So of those two drives, there are a lot of things to make you frustrated. Incomplete passes where they could have completed a pass and gotten a first down and continued to roll down that clock at about 3 minutes down to 2 on that what ended up being the second to last drive. But I'm actually okay with those plays because that's still time to be aggressive. That's not time to milk the clock. And if they ran the ball 3 times and had to punt it back, we would have been saying, why don't you stay aggressive? You have one of the best passers in the country. So I have no problem with the second to last drive. It's down here, lobbing the ball up to Jawan Johnson on a play that you almost never run. And then it's Trace McSorley making the decision to go out of bounds. I mean, that's your football game right there. Those two plays, and I still think I have an issue with that read option up the middle, initially. I know that's an offense that they run, but Trace McSorley didn't have enough success during the game getting up the middle in between the tackles against the country's best run defense, even if they didn't show it during most of that 60-minute span. They did when they ran that particular play, and they went right back to it on the game's decisive possession. So really, those 2 to 3 plays are where the issues were for Penn State. Trace McSorley with a bad throw to Johnson, a worse call by Ricky Ronnie. Trace McSorley's decision to pull and head up the middle. Again, I don't know if that's the right call from Ricky Ronnie. And then on the third down, the fateful third down, McSorley making the decision on his own to scoot out of bounds. That's your football game. And of course, there are many other things that happened. Amani Oruwariye could have made an interception on the last drive, but that's a physical mistake. We had mental mistakes occurring on these 3 plays that ended up costing Penn State the football game. So that's our Blitz for today. We'll come back on the other side. We'll talk a lot more about this Penn State team moving forward. We'll talk about some of the big games this week, so hang with us here on the Nittany Lion Sports Report live on BLS.
Ford is Mayfair's neighborhood Ford store.
Nobody knows your neighborhood like Dunphy Ford.
Nearly 40 years.
Right here on Frankfurt Avenue.
Generation after generation. Our neighbors continue to be our customers. We have access to the cars and trucks you want with financing you need.
Dunphy Ford is Northeast Philly's first choice for America's #1 brand. 7700 Frankfurt Avenue in Mayfair. Online at www.dumpyford.com.
Come experience the Dumpy difference. You'll be glad you did.
What does your character look like? Does it bounce back after each setback? Does it stand out by standing up? Does it make good on good intentions? Character is invisible until it's not. Only through action will the world know what it's made of, what you're made of. Find out how you can strengthen the character of your community alongside empowered veterans and families of the fallen at travismanion.org.
I would say that LaSalle is dynamic. Prepared. Active. Diverse. Brotherhood. Family.
Welcome back to the Nittany Lion Sports Report, everybody. Bob Long, Tyler Gehlhaus. Appreciate everybody hanging with us here on this Wednesday evening as we go through what went wrong against Michigan State. I still think it's important to, even after that Blitz segment where I kind of lambasted the play calling in the final couple minutes, to remember that these are young coaches. Ricky Ronnie's first opportunity is a bright guy. He learned under Joe Moe. And I do think that he'll be successful here long term. I think he's, well, long term if he wants to be. He's not going to be let go. If he leaves, it's going to be because a big program comes after him for their head coaching job. And that's one where if you have a successful program, that's going to happen to your coaches. Doesn't feel like it right now, but at some point, mark my words, that's what's going to happen to a really young and talented assistant. So when I say that, I mean, specifically in that moment, there were some bad decisions made. No reason he can't learn from it. Remember your first day or your first year on the job. Things will improve, and he is very, very bright. So they're getting themselves at bats, and for a kind of young program here in many ways, this is a program that is in every single football game, and there are young guys that are getting playing time already. I think they'll be better for it. Sure, it really is a shame not to compete for a national championship this year as a Penn State fan, and I know a lot of fans feel that way, but I think that this program's in a great spot. I said the same thing at the end of last year, and I don't feel any differently after that Michigan State game than I did before. So that's kind of my takeaway is there's so much to get into with this game. I think we did a lot, and I think we properly got into the discussion of what went wrong and why, and that it's not acceptable. In the long term, things are well. And I think they'll continue to go well, and I think that the way they finish this season will say a lot about the character of this team. With that said, Indiana this weekend. Sorry to Peyton Ramsey and co. We did not get to preview you at all here tonight, so we're going to go right to predictions, starting with you, Tyler.
I think the offense is going to turn it around this week. Indiana, it helps Penn State that the game's at 3:30. It's not at 12 o'clock. But I'm not really sure what to make of Indiana. They played pretty well against Ohio State for a while, a couple weeks ago. They're kind of one of those teams that can always give you a game, or it could be a very easy win, depending on which team shows up for Penn State. I think you're going to get an angry Penn State team. I just hope that they're not trying too hard and pushing the issue. I think they do win comfortably. I'll go 42-24. Indiana can put up points, so can Penn State. And Indiana's defense looked terrible last week against Iowa. Nate Stanley, Iowa's quarterback, put up points, 6 touchdown passes. So I expect McSorley to be able to do the same. Maybe not 6 touchdown passes, but I see a big bounce-back game against Indiana.
I think Penn State wins big. I'm going to call it a 21-point football game, and I think they win handily in Indiana and really start gearing up for a very difficult portion of the schedule down the stretch. And I know we're not predicting this, but I think they're going to be successful. I think they're going to beat both Michigan and Wisconsin. Throwing that out there right now.
You forgot about Iowa.
I think they beat Iowa as well.
Okay, because that's obviously after
You're
Indiana,
right.
and Iowa's
right.
a ranked team, and they're hot right now as well.
No doubt about that.
Anyways, real quick, we'll do some predictions for this week. Unfortunately, we aren't going to have the entertainment of the possible playoff paths anymore for Penn State, but still a lot can happen. I'm not saying they're going to the playoff because they're not, but still, nonetheless, a lot of good football games to predict. And
if they win out, they are the number 2 team in the Big Ten.
Sure, and I mean, there's a lot to play for. 10-win season,
Rose Bowl.
Yeah, right. So there still is a lot to play for. So we'll still do the picks, even though they don't really matter as much in terms of Penn State's playoff hopes. First, we'll go last week's victor, Michigan State, hosting Michigan. Noon, Michigan State's home.
So I like the Wolverines here. We put this behind us, and this has been all in a negative context, deja vu all over again. I think it's deja vu all over again for Michigan State. They win a game that they shouldn't have won. Tell me, are they ranked this week?
Michigan 6, Michigan State 24.
Okay. So Michigan State popped high into the top 25 last year after they beat Penn State in a game that I don't necessarily think that they should have. They got up to number 12 in the country and got their doors blown off by Ohio State. I think the same thing happens here this week. They win a game that they shouldn't have won against Penn State team, didn't play their best game. You give all the credit in the world to the Spartans. However, they're overranked right now, and I know that they're ranked behind Penn State, even though they beat Penn State. So save that for me on the social media channels. I get it. They're going to get their doors blown off by Michigan this week, and it's going to be a repeat of what happened last year after they had their big win against Penn State.
Yeah, I think Michigan's going to win. I don't think it'll be a blowout. I think it'll be less than 10. I mean, just because it's a rivalry for both teams, big brother, little brother.
Yep.
But, I mean, you just never know how emotion works in college football. You don't. I mean, it's the one thing you really cannot explain, as you just said, from their big wins last year, Michigan State. You just can't explain psychology and really what's going through these 18 to 22-year-olds' heads. So
you're exactly right about that.
That's what makes it so much fun at the end of the day.
You're right. That's why Georgia gets hammered by LSU last week. Give all the credit in the world to LSU. LSU's not, 2-3 touchdowns better than Georgia. And things happen to young kids.
While we're on it, number 22, Joe Moorhead's Mississippi State Bulldogs travel to Baton Rouge. Interesting matchup, I think, that they have here.
So interesting because Joe Moorhead is a guy who is already, and if you can believe this, a little bit polarizing in Starkville, Mississippi. A guy that couldn't be less polarizing when he was here at Penn State. And as Penn State fans start to call out Ricky Ronnie and say that he has no idea what he's doing as an offensive coordinator, which I think is ridiculous as a holistic statement, and saying that Joe Mo was the way, you have people in Starkville criticizing the way Joe Moorhead was calling football games in the first month of the season. Then they go and they win a game that they shouldn't against
Auburn.
Who
isn't as good as we all thought, including yourself.
That's right. Who isn't as good as I thought. Not even close. And the reaction is not Joe Mo did a great job in that game. It's thank God Joe Mo finally started doing what we told him to do, was run the football with Nick Fitzgerald. So it's just interesting the way things work in college football. I don't think they win that football game. I would love to say it. I would love to give a little Hail State, ring the bell for them, but I think that LSU is going to win that football game at Death Valley.
Yeah, LSU 6.5-point favorite at home. They have a gauntlet of games coming up. They already took care of Georgia. Next, they have Mississippi State, and after that, I believe they have Alabama. I believe that game is coming up shortly.
Is that the 3:30 CBS game?
This week it is Mississippi State. LSU is actually it's at 7.
Okay.
But LSU has a bye after this, and then the showdown with Alabama.
Very interesting. That could set up well for them.
I mean, I agree. I think LSU
that could set up really well for them.
And it's at home. So I think that LSU things are going their way right now. That
They
usually
really shouldn't
usually
have lost
don't.
to Florida.
Right. So I'm going go Tigers as well there.
Okay.
Let me get back.
They should not have lost to Florida. Could you imagine what they'd be looking like right now if they hadn't lost that game?
I mean, but still, they control their own destiny.
They do, no doubt about it.
Let me go. I'm sorry, 1 second. Schedule.
The reason why that game, of course, would have been so important is that all Penn State would have needed was Alabama to win out at that point, and the SEC would have been down to one team. Now the SEC could theoretically still get 2 teams, and the way it could be would be LSU winning out and Alabama winning every game but LSU. And I think that you could still get those 2 teams in there from the SEC.
The 3:30 CBS game is Alabama, Tennessee.
Gotcha.
Doesn't do much for me.
No.
Another good game, though, to pay attention to. Big win in the ACC, NC State at Clemson.
I like Clemson. I don't think they lose a home game this year. If that game was at NC State, I think Clemson, speaking of the Tigers, would sleepwalk through a game like that. We've seen it too many times. And
17.5-point favorites the Tigers are. I mean, that's... Yeah.
I don't see them losing a home game. I'll say it again. So they win this game.
I'm right there with you. I don't know if they'll cover, but that's not really what matters in college football is that you get the win. So I'm going Clemson. I think they'll run the table this year until the college football playoff. The ACC is just so weak. We've touched
as
on
bad
that
as it's
today.
Ever been. Louisville,
Florida
State.
It's
as
not
bad
good.
As they've been.
And this week's games really aren't that strong. I guess the last
Pullman.
game. Yeah, I was just gonna say Oregon at Washington State.
College game day going to Pullman for the first time. The Washington
First
State
time
flag.
ever.
First time ever.
Wow, that's crazy.
With the Washington State flag,
And they're
following
favored
those
by
guys.
3.
Really?
Yeah.
I like Oregon on the road. Ducks.
Coming off that big win against Washington.
Give me the big
You
O.
know how the emotions work. I'm going Washington State.
Okay, look at you.
They're going to be jacked up out there. You mentioned the big flag. For those that don't know, I don't know. Do you want to tell the crowd about the history behind the...
Sure. I mean, they should. Hopefully they know it. If they don't, it's a tremendous history. College game day has been going all around the country for years and years and years. Decades now. Really, really great show. They don't allow flags inside the metal barriers, that little square area behind the desk where the people are holding up the signs and whatnot. But you're always going to see this flagpole waving, a red one with some silver markings, that's the Washington State logo, and then a silver one with the maroon Washington State logo. And those folks are diehard Washington State fans and alums that travel every single week, wherever college game day is, and wave that flag. And don't think that the guys don't notice it. They all know who this Washington State contingency is. And there have become some imposters over recent years.
You can't
it
copy
will
that one.
always be Wazoo.
There actually is, if you look it up on the internet, that you can find. They did actually like a not a documentary, but a segment on the guy, girl, whoever does the flag, and it's actually really interesting. College Game Day showed it a couple years ago, I want to say. So very interesting if you ever want to look that up. But
BLS has a picture with him too.
That's true.
From the fall of 2009.
We'll have to get that up next week, maybe, if we can dig it through the archives.
That.
Yeah. Anyway, and another good one for next week, since Penn State's playing Iowa, would be your College Game Day signs from when you were a student at Penn State.
When I was a freshman.
Maybe we can dig up those pictures as well. But
we might just have to.
I'm going Cougars in this. It's for the for the lead in the Pac-12 North. It's just a lot of shuffling right now until they figure themselves out.
And this will about take the conference out of the mix, right?
Yeah, I think the conference is kind of already out of the mix. I don't think
Oregon?
I don't think they're going to run it. I mean,
But if they do,
but I don't think they will. I think Washington State's going to win, and I just think they're going to be so juiced up, and that can go either way. Being that juiced up with the emotions that we talked about, but I think they'll pull it out. High score, fun one to watch. I mean, definitely that's going to be a one that you have to watch on Saturday night.
One more on the folks with the flag College Game Day. How good is that if you're an administrator or the president of Washington
Best
State?
advertising ever.
Free.
They should be paying, though.
They should be.
I mean,
maybe
seriously.
they are. I don't know.
Everybody talks about it that watches the show, too. It's a great thing that they're doing, so... Proud alums.
Yeah, it replaces having the value that having a good football program has. So there you go. Although they've got a decent program as well, but not as much traditionally.
Well,
so it
no better
replaces,
opportunity than Saturday,
Why
all
not?
day Saturday. It's all on them. So
Yep.
now's their time. Mike Leach, the
Absolutely.
Pirate.
What a character. Unbelievable. It was a good show tonight, Tyler. I really appreciated having you on. And it's not an easy discussion when there's a loss like this, but I think it's important that when we criticize, make sure everybody knows that when we're criticizing specific play call. I am not ready to make holistic statements about this coaching staff, other than the holistic statement that this coaching staff is as well-rounded a coaching staff as this program has ever had, and they're put in a position to consistently succeed at a much greater frequency than has been the case throughout the history of Penn State football in a much more difficult time to be successful in college football with less scholarships per school and more talent and deeper at the high school level. And they are there every single year. As long as that's the case, we need to keep that in mind and realize that this program's in a great spot, and to let these young guys, coaches and players included, come on up, do their thing, and give themselves a lot more at-bats next year and the rest of this year. And I guarantee they will continue to.
Still way ahead of the curve, if you ask me.
Yep.
I mean, really, ever since, the first 2 years, James Franklin barely got 500. They went to those 2 bowl games. Ever since then, they took strides. I mean, Rome wasn't built in a day, as they say, or overnight, whatever the saying is. And college football programs certainly aren't either. As tough as the losses are and the close games, I mean, the future is incredibly bright. You just hope that they can figure out the little things and become elite.
Hang in, folks. Hang in. Be with this program the rest of the year. Be with us the rest of the year. These games are important. Win out and you're in the Rose Bowl. Think about that. How many times have they gone to the Rose Bowl in the history of the program? Certainly some, but it is still quite the treat to be able to do it, and it says a lot about your season. So hang in there, hang tough, watch Indiana, follow the team, and get ready for what should be a great stretch run. And I know we'll be there with all you guys the rest of the way. So for Tyler Gehlhaus, I am Bob Long saying so long here from our Nittany Lion Sports Report studios in Bluebell, and we will be back next week to recap that Indiana game and preview the stretch run. Have a great rest of the week, everybody, and we'll talk to you soon.